Welcome to RevOps Bites. This is Kathryn here, and today I'm joined by Emily McGrath. Emily is currently a revenue and strategy and operations manager at Hypori, but she's had a varied career at organizations of all different sizes, from startups to global software companies. And we're going to be talking today about a whole variety of things. For example, what it's like to be the first solo RevOps hire at a company, to change management, and the importance of leading from beside. Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine. I'm excited to be here today.
Same, the feeling is mutual. So I would love to jump right in and hear about how you actually got started in the RevOps space, because everybody always has a different story. Was it intentional? Was it a happy accident? I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I'd consider it a little bit of a happy accident. I've been in the tech space for about the last 12 years, but started that in more contract and account management, and have always reported into sales operations. And I would say I owe a lot of that to my career, really getting to kind of understand how sales work, being a true partner to the sales organization, all started with that account management work. And, from there, as my career progressed, I continued to take kind of more of the, what I'd consider traditional sales operations roles. And, I've really found what I think is my niche, and something that I'm really excited about in stepping into kind of, again, those more traditional sales and RevOps roles.
Great. Do you remember if there was any point in your, RevOps career journey that you realized like, this is where I belong, this is my lane?
I think for me, it was kind of when I stepped out of those account management roles and into, I would say probably when I got thrown into to Salesforce with an admin license day one in my first kind of sales operations lead role. It was this moment of like, here we go out there, and I had a chance to really kind of step in and learn head first, dive right in. And that's something that I love. I've always naturally been a very curious person. And so I think that leans really well into the work that we do in sales and RevOps, especially when we're the first hire or one of the first hires at an organization. We are usually that person that people go to when there isn't somebody in an organization that's handling data processes and so forth. And so for me, stepping into a world into a role where I'm able to say, I don't know the answer to this, but let's find it, is kind of where I strive best, because I get to roll up my sleeves and be really resourceful. And so I think kind of, again, stepping in day one into that transition from working with customers, working with sales teams, and really starting to work cross-functionally across the org and stepping into the unknown. It was like, this is where I'm meant to be, because I get to learn and I get to thrive. And I get to also, still be a partner to the sales teams, but on the other side of that, helping them make processes easier, and helping them sell better.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that. I've also in the past been thrown into environments kind of in the deep end, and it's a bit of a sink or swim moment for a lot of us. But it's interesting how those moments often end up being really like pivotal moments in our lives, right? And can present a great opportunity for growth, particularly when, as you mentioned, we have like a growth mindset and that innate curiosity, which I think, like you said, that is something that's generally common to a lot of people in RevOps and sales operations and similar roles, right?
Yeah, I think having that genuine curiosity helps us to really understand the why, and what we do, and also help to I guess translate that into for the teams that we're working with across sales, finance, marketing, customer success. You name it. Are that curiosity and knowing like how a system works, how a process works, and helping bring sense to that also helps us be a good partner to those teams, to be able to guide them along the way, to help understand where we are, but also where we're going to. And I think getting to that why is so important when you are working with the teams that we do, because as we know, we are usually those conduits of change in an organization, and as fast fast-paced and as comfortable with change as we say we are. I think that we're creatures of habit as well too, and so we're in this trusted role to be able to truly help lead from beside and be able to guide the teams that we're working with so that they understand, hey, point B may seem scary because we've never been there before, but you have this trusted partner in sales ops and RevOps that's going to help guide you along the way to make sure that you're successful.
Yeah, definitely. Last time we spoke, we were talking a bit about this philosophy of leading from beside. Let me make sure I get it correct. I would love to hear more about that. How would you, explain it to somebody who's new to the idea, and why do you think it's so important in this type of role?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the best way that I can explain it is, I've been a part of organizations that have brought about change, whether that's because they've acquired a company and are bringing that company into kind of the fold of existing processes, or when you're with, a newer organization where you're building process where it hasn't existed before. As I mentioned, that idea of change is scary. And when, you are that change agent and you are coming in and kind of leading in a way that says like it's this way or the highway, you're gonna be approached with a lot of hesitancy and fear, and a lot of people who shut down. And especially when you're when you're rolling out a process or bringing in a new system, having that buy-in and that trust from those teams is important. And so, in leading from beside, as I like to call it, you're getting to know the people that are impacted and truly understanding what matters to them so that you can tie that into the goals of the organization, so that, it's more of this conversational, understanding of, hey, I understand this is where we are, but this is why we're going the way that we are, or the direction that we're going in, and this is why this benefits you as well too. And building that trust, taking that time to understand current state, how that ties into future state, really helps build trust that's needed to bring about successful change. And I think with that too, communicating with teams in that way of, really more matter of fact, building that trust and guiding them to that point B is really, I think it was what helped me be successful in my roles as well too, because I attribute a lot of the success that I've had to the connections I've made along the way and that trust that I've built with teams. And so and I think too, with that, you're seen as that person who, helped roll out this really successful change or helped bring us on board with this exciting project. And so you're seen as that person that, did this great here. Now you're that trusted person that's going to help make this next initiative even better.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. I think that for some of us, we can end up focusing a lot on the technical side of, RevOps and GTM systems and all of that. But a lot of it is people. It's a very, very people focused role. And, everything that we're doing is for the benefit of the people that are using the systems and processes that we're designing and implementing. So I really love that, and I think it's a great thing to bear in mind. I'd love to hear if you have any examples from your career that you can share of times where, like you maybe had a person or a group of people who are really hesitant, and, using your methodology of leading from beside, you were able to bring about a change. I'd love to hear more about that if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of things come to mind. One spans back a little bit earlier in my career. I was with a company that grew through acquisitions. In the 5 years or so I was there, they acquired about 7 or 8 companies. And one of the bigger companies that we'd acquired grew kind of similarly to how we did. And, I was on our sales operations team. We, one of the initiatives that we took when we acquired these companies was bringing them into our quote to cash process. And a big focus of that was our renewals process. For any SaaS organization, that retention and that recurring revenue is king, and having high renewal rates is really important. And we automatically invoiced all of our customers about 90 days ahead of their renewal, and that was part of our playbook as we acquired companies, was bringing them into that process. process, integrating them into our CRM or into our billing processes. And because I was so integrated in that as an account manager and understanding our processes, I was typically kind of a partner to those companies we were bringing in to understand how they operated and help our systems teams, our finance teams, be able to bring them into the fold. And with this larger company we acquired, they grew pretty similarly to how we did through acquisitions, and we kind of brought each of those kind of business lines into our process kind of one by one. And there was one group that was definitely a little more hesitant, though. I'll say when we would bring any company into that process, we were usually faced with that concern of, well, that's not how we handle renewals for our customers, or how will this impact our ability to cross-sell or expand into our customers. And because we had the opportunity to do this with other companies before, we had the data to I was able to understand the concerns that they had, and understandably so. That expansion is huge for our new sales team, and being able to cross-sell is huge. But what we had seen with the data that we had was, we saw higher renewal rates when we were getting invoices out the door sooner, because we were able to be more proactive. A lot of teams, including kind of our core team that we started the auto invoicing process with, started with a sales team managing that. And because the sales team was more incentivized to focus on new business, that renewal business was kind of being left to the wayside anyways. So we were getting more proactive with that. And also, because we were more proactive with that too, we were opening doors to conversations even sooner to understand concerns that customers had, or that to get ahead of those expansion conversations sooner. And having that history and being able to share that with those teams that had that concern built enough of that trust that they understood, okay, we understand that this is how this process has worked for other teams, we're willing to try this. But I think having those examples, understanding those concerns, and being able to tie that into how the solution that you're coming forth can help solve that, it really helps build that trust. And I've followed that kind of continuously.
I was going to say, I have to imagine that just the fact that you took time and had patience to go through all of their concerns, to take them seriously so that they felt heard, went a long way to build that trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any, both in my professional life and personal life, I volunteer a lot and am on the board for a few volunteer organizations. And, I think in the work that I do, and either at the end of the day, we are working with people who have valid concerns, and I think ultimately want to make sure that they're doing kind of what's right. And I think understanding, where those concerns are, or what questions they have, helps them feel heard, and also allows you to understand things that you may not otherwise see. I've also in some of those acquisitions that we would make, we had other processes that we were bringing in, licensing, or other parts of the sales and lead process. And in building those connections and building those relationships, we were able to start to get those other questions of, well, but what about this? Our customers need this, or we do this for our customers. And so we were able to address those questions sooner than go live. Whereas in other examples of projects that I've rolled out where you don't get to those questions sooner, that's where you get those gotchas of like being ready to roll something out and finding out, oh wait, there's this whole part of our customer base that we weren't thinking about, or there's this whole use case that we weren't thinking about. And so really bringing those stakeholders along for the ride, so that they know what's happening, gives them that chance and makes them know that they're seen and heard, so that they feel comfortable speaking up in those cases as well too.
Yeah, exactly. It made me think how, I think that sometimes, like particularly in fast moving environments and startups, there can be this idea like, oh, we don't really have time to do change management. People are just going to have to get on board because otherwise it's going to slow us down. But your example gives it gives a really powerful perspective as to why proper change management doesn't always actually slow things down. Like, it might feel like you have to take more time up front, but then once you've got people on board, the entire relationship can move faster. You're getting information that you might not otherwise have. People are coming to you proactively with like questions and ideas. And I have to imagine that over time, it gives you much higher velocity. Like, it's not actually something that slows you down, even though initially you might feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with anything, change management, process documentation, taking that moment to be intentional, taking that pause, to communicate, this is what's coming, this is how this is coming, again, builds that trust and helps people understand what's coming versus putting a new process right in front of somebody and saying, starting today we're doing this.
Yeah.
You're going to be fraught with that hesitancy of like, well, wait a minute, but this is how we've done things, and what about this, and what about that? And sometimes in those moments you get those gotchas because you didn't take that moment to understand, hey team, how do you handle XYZ, or walk me through this process, and what would happen if we did X, Y, and Z. And so taking that moment to ask those questions, or when you are rolling out a process, to take that moment to document what changes are happening or how a process should be followed, is going to save a ton of time, when you do roll out that process, or a year down the road when you realize, hey, we need to kind of revisit this. It helps you to answer those questions of, now what were we thinking a year ago when we
Yeah.
built this?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
sometimes too, you're coming into I think we can all relate as RevOps professionals. We're coming into a team where a system or process was built before, and we think, why did they do it this way? And so, you're saving yourself headache, but also too, for the folks that may come, after you, it's helping them as well too. And also too, we hope that that happens for us at some point in our careers too, or we come into a role where there is some of that
Hmm.
documentation to understand that why and how, so we can help kind of tie that together as we're rebuilding the wheel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on the topic of documentation, I do feel like maybe I'm biased a little bit here, but I feel like it's not always the favorite part of the role for people to be, documenting processes or, even if simple things like adding descriptions to fields in Salesforce, that kind of thing. Like, people, I think they don't find it exciting or that stimulating for understandable reasons, and for that reason, they may kind of leave it by the wayside. Do you have any recommendations or tips and tricks that you found that do help to get things documented, or at least sort of keep you motivated to, keep documenting the most important things as you know, have to have to prioritize multiple competing priorities as we always do?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think for me, what I will say, I understand it is a very tedious thing to take that time to truly document a process. And so what I've found to be helpful are using tools that help you record processes. Sometimes I build a lot of training videos, or even as I'm explaining things that I'm building to people, which I've also found too that, people are more receptive to watching a video versus maybe reading pages and pages of documentation. I still like to write that out, but with a lot of tools that we have today, if you're recording, you can also transcribe that using the video that you've created too, and that helps a ton. And there's tons of AI tools that you can leverage as well too to help creating both of those things. But I found walking through that how to for me is more engaging to be able to document that. But also too, I think it goes back to, again, taking that moment to realize, hey, this may seem a little bit monotonous now, but 6 months down the road, I'm going to thank myself for documenting this, or putting in a ticket for this and tracking how I built this here, or what requirements I had, so that I can make a little bit more sense of, okay, this is why we built this. Now let's understand how we need to change this. And
Yeah.
so I guess my tip there is, take the time; it's worth it, and leverage what tools are out there. To make it easier for you, because there's
Yeah.
a ton of them out there.
And like try to, I guess, keep the longer term view in mind as well. Like it might be tedious right now, but it's going to make your life so much easier and less stressful, 3, 6, 12 months down the line when you come back and you're like, oh, thank you so much, past me. I remember to document this, as opposed to, oh my goodness, what was I thinking?
What
Why
was
did
I
we do this in
thinking?
the first place? Yeah, who can remember after, like 12 months of different projects, exactly what the context was back then? Everything changes
Absolutely.
so quickly.
Yeah, and I think I think in RevOps we are accustomed to context shifting a lot, and even in our
Yeah.
day to day, like the topics we go through on a day to day basis, there's a lot, and so again, that taking that time so that you're looking at. Really doing it for the road ahead is how I see it. And I mean, I think a lot of the work that we're doing in general is with the mindset of scaling, not just for the now. We're
Yes.
not building a solution necessarily as a band-aid fix for now. We're building a solution that's going to scale as we grow and scale as well too. And so taking that time to document that why for yourself too is so important.
Yeah, that's made me think of a few other questions. So you just touched upon scalability, which I totally agree. Like in an ideal world, we want to build things out that will scale as a company grows and not just build things for the now. However, I I guess I would hazard a guess that you've been in a situation where you have to, like balance like needing a fix or needing something right now versus needing something that will scale, and the two things are kind of competing. So how do you tend to handle those kind of situations and come to like the best possible solution considering, time or resource constraints?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially when we are a team of one,
Yeah.
we have to get things out the door. That production is key, and I think being able to understand and assess the risk of, is putting this field in that's going to help us today, going to break something down the road, or again, if we document, what we're building this field for, to use it so that we can get an answer today, can we change that down the road? Or having that documented, is that going to help us when we do look back to understand, well, why did we have this in the first place? And so I think assessing that risk, and also too, I think in the roles that we're in, understanding where that we can take that risk, but also where we can find a creative solution that does help compromise, is important. And I think also to understanding where we may need to push back when needed, because a short-term fix could hurt us down the road, is really important. And I think,
Mm.
again, it all stems back to building that trust with the teams you have, so that they know, like, if we're saying, hey, not now, it's because we need to address things that are gonna help us a little bit further down the road, or understanding, like, hey, what we have isn't the permanent solution, is important too, because I've also been in situations where what's supposed to be a temporary fix ends up being what
Yeah.
everybody goes to for everything, and then you're stuck having to try to scale to this temporary solution, and that's also not fun either.
No, I agree. I've been in situations like that before. I think sometimes it can honestly be hard to avoid, particularly like
Yeah.
when you said you're, for example, a team of one in a high growth environment, supporting a lot of different teams. Like sometimes you do have to implement a less than optimal solution, but like you said, going in with your eyes open and doing a risk assessment rather than just, blindly implementing everything that your stakeholders tell you to, and also maybe documenting those less than optimal solutions and, why we went down that path. it can help us correct them at some point in the future, assuming we do have time in the future, of course.
Yeah, yes, if we have time when we're a larger team.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. So going back to this idea of being like the first RevOps hire or a solo or a team of one, let's say, um, how like what are some of the most important things you think one should assess coming into a role? And maybe what are some of the key moves that you would make or have made in the past in say like the first, 90 days to try and set yourself up for success and build that trust that you've mentioned is really critical in relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the thing that I would do, both in roles where I have been, say, a team of one, now I'm fortunate to be we're still a startup, but, still part of a smaller team, but have been in those kind of smaller teams. I've also been a part of, larger sales and RevOps teams. And I think, regardless, the one thing that I, will do day one, first week in a role is I think getting to meet the stakeholders that you're working with, and starting to kind of piece together what is your lead to cash process and understanding, what systems are in place, what processes are or aren't in place, what teams you're working with is helpful because you can really start to map that together. What tools are we using? What data are we capturing? What data do we wish we were capturing? So you can start to understand where those gaps are. Are there processes that are very manual? And with that, are there some quick wins there that can be put in place to help the team move faster? And I think some examples that come to my mind there, particularly that I've been able to help with, in those kind of early days, is identifying processes where, say, like alerts or notifications that could be going out automatically maybe aren't to teams when deals are closed, or helping to automate processes when customer renewals are in place, to help teams be more proactive. Any of those things that help drive the team to be more proactive versus maybe reactive, are big game changers for people. And I don't think folks necessarily always realize like how impactful thing that is, not just for the person that is in the day-to-day of it, but for the teams that they're working with as well too. So identifying those kind of quick wins that do help with that scale long term, because you're giving people more time back, are huge. And I think with that too, if you're managing systems, you can see where there's redundancy, where there's opportunity to have tools playing together more nicely in the sandbox. Really mapping that out is huge. And I think, as you're getting into the fold too, in roles like that, I've been pulled into a lot of data projects initially early on, because you're able to take that unbiased kind of or approach and ask, why are we doing this, or how have we done things this way, or how are we capturing that, so that you can see where those gaps are, and identifying those opportunities as well too. But again, I think another important piece of that is building those relationships with the people that you're going to be working with from day one, because without building a people-oriented solution, you can build all day long, but if it's a process that a team doesn't trust or won't follow or doesn't make sense for how the team operates, and it doesn't make sense. And so building that trust day one is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be an amazing process, but if people are not on board or they're, hesitant for some reason, it doesn't really matter. If they're not going to be using it, then it just doesn't work. But no, it was really, it was making me think about how we approach a lot of our engagements at Candybox, like getting some quick wins and building trust. Although, we definitely go in with a long-term view, to build scalability and, make sure we're going to be rolling out processes that work long-term for teams. I think that getting those quick wins is such an accelerator. Like it really shows teams like, oh, this person or this team is coming in to help us. Like they see our pain points. Like they can deliver quickly on things that matter to us, and then that helps facilitate things long term as well, and like build trust. So there were so many other things that you said that made me think of other questions to ask you. I'm thinking where to begin. I think maybe you're talking about interviewing stakeholders as being a really great place to start to, start to
Yeah.
get to know people, understand their processes, see, opportunities, gaps, understand the tech stack, all kinds of things. I know that a lot of people do this and have various different approaches from starting at the VP level or mostly talking to, execs and team leads versus actually like getting in the weeds and talking to reps doing like the day-to-day work and actually going through these processes. What do you prefer to focus on there? Do you like to talk to everybody at all different levels of the organization? Do you find that starting in a certain place like gives you better results?
I think for me, one, I do like to interview everybody. I think you get that candid perspective from the people that are in the weeds, and also maybe get a true sense of like what they are working with and how, I know like our executives and the higher level folks, that those people in the day to day they report to do, generally have a sense of how their teams operate, but aren't necessarily in the day to day to know how are things captured. Is it really automatic, or is the team manually capturing that? Or how is that data showing up? The people that are in really working in systems and are selling to customers, they're the ones that know how they're operating best. And so I think getting their candid feedback is huge, but I think it's also important too to interview those executive stakeholders too, to understand what are the pain points, what are we missing today, where do we like to go, and understanding that too, because really what you're building is a solution that kind of weaves those two things together. It's building that person focused process, but in a way that helps us get the insights that executive leadership needs to be
Yeah.
able to make decisions, move fast, and so forth. And so, really tying those two together is important. Now, where you begin, I would say I don't necessarily have an opinion on that, but I think making sure that you are truly getting all of that is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I completely agree. It makes complete sense. Um, well, one thing you were talking about a couple minutes ago was about data projects and being brought into data projects. I feel like this is a huge topic.
Yeah.
Um, but just in terms of data hygiene, do you have a like a high level process or an approach that you follow in terms of like assessing the state and health of an organization's data and figuring out where to start improving that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it starts with understanding like what metrics the teams is managing today. What are they reporting to today? But then also too, how are they capturing that? And I know that that's a pretty kind of a broad statement, but I think in a number of kind of ideas come to my mind. If you're reporting on data that you're having to manually manipulate, is there an opportunity to improve how that's being captured in the system so that you're not pulling your data out of Salesforce, manipulating it into a spreadsheet to get the reports that you're looking for? So that's something that I look to identify. I think also identifying too, like if there's data that is very, that we're heavily dependent on, if that doesn't exist in the system today or exists in a way that isn't being captured consistently, where is there opportunity to standardize that, whether that be through process or through systems, building automations that help with naming conventions or with standardizing how certain numbers are captured. So I think really understanding both of those things and finding that in between is what's helpful for me too. And I think also too, not being afraid to roll up your sleeves and understand like what truly is being captured is helpful, or where you may need to work on cleaning up that data to get it into a better spot for some of those quick wins that we talked about as well too, to be able to help implement processes that make it easier.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I don't know about you. I personally sometimes in past roles or projects, I've noticed there are data issues, and from my perspective, I can see that they're having an impact, or they're going to have a big impact on the company's operations. However, it can be difficult sometimes to convince other stakeholders of why it's really important to spend time on cleaning up the data now or improving processes standardization. I'm curious whether you've encountered situations like that before, and if so, what are some of the approaches you found that did help people who might be hesitant to spend the time there understand that it is important and in their best interest to spend some time on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it goes back to tying back to, what matters to that person or to that team or to those stakeholders, and if you are seeing that, there's, that data, or from that data, that there is going to be an impact, being able to, represent that. A lot of times it's truly telling that story, and explaining that, how that, where that impact may be, usually is what opens their eyes to that, and to understand, like, okay, now I see, what you're talking about, and here's where that risk is. Now, how can we fix that? But again, addressing those things in a way that, that address, or that brings attention to the things that matter to them, I think is what's, going to be the most attention grabbing.
Yep, yep, makes complete sense to me. I think we're coming up on time, so just maybe one more question to
Yeah.
wrap things up. For somebody who's maybe, listened to this episode and has been thinking like, wow, I would really like to improve my, relationship building skills or my change management skills. What might be some recommendations that you have on where somebody could start with that?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think, for me, what's been helpful has been, I think for me, following a lot of resources on LinkedIn and online. I've read a lot of great resources on communication. I'm reading a book currently on nonviolent communication, which isn't necessarily, from what have read so far, isn't necessarily thing that you necessarily need to use to address violent communication, so to speak. But it's a book that talks about how to have effective communication, to be able to address the needs of both people in those conversations. And so I think resources like that are super helpful. I think also too, having that genuine curiosity, which I know a lot of RevOps folks have, and realizing that, we are, in a very person-centric role, whether we realize it or not, and taking that moment to understand the person that, that we are supporting, or rather the teams that we're supporting, and using that genuine curiosity to tie those two together is going to help make our work a lot easier. And so that's, one of my recommendations, I guess, is, stay curious, and, continue to, build those connections with the people that you work with. Ask the questions. I think asking those questions helps build that trust as well too, and know that there's a whole network of folks out there as well too, again, on LinkedIn, and a lot of LinkedIn communities, Slack communities out there in sales and RevOps, that are going to have a ton of ideas if you don't know the answer as well too. I'm so glad that you've put together this resource for folks as well too, because, especially when you are that first or a very early hire in a startup organization, you may think that, it's a bit isolating, but there's a whole network of people, out there that are more than willing to share ideas, hop on a Zoom call to talk through ideas, or to introduce you to their network as well too. So don't be afraid to reach out and make those connections as well too, because I think, as genuinely curious as folks are in the RevOps community, we're also genuinely very helpful people too, whether it's helping the teams that we're supporting or our networks as well too. So don't be afraid to ask, and remember, if you do ask, the worst somebody can say is no, and you're no worse off than you were before too. So ask those questions, and stay curious.
Yeah, that is 1,000% great advice. I couldn't agree more. The RevOps community is so lovely and so helpful. I think that we're, yeah, naturally helpful people, which explains a lot why we ended up in this type of role. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I would like to say a huge thank you, Emily. This was a wonderful conversation, and I really, really appreciate you giving me some of your time to share all of your insights. I think this will be really helpful to so many people out there. So yeah, huge thank you, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me, and excited to watch what other awesome insights folks share in the other episodes too.
Great. Thank you so much.